Hello, I'm Isaac Heath Martinez, and welcome to Isaac's Haunted Beard. Okay, we're going to try something very different today. Today, instead of reviewing a movie or talking about how I feel about a TV show or something else that I love, I'm going to talk about which movies I watched in the first week of this month. And if all goes well, I'm going to do this again and again and again until I decide I don't want to do it anymore. I watch movies, or at least I try to watch movies every day. Sometimes I watch one movie. Typically, lately, I've been watching two movies, double features. And occasionally I'll even watch three movies. I talk about these movies on Twitter, so a lot of my Twitter pals are very familiar with this. But there's only so much you can say on Twitter because you're limited to, a character count of how much words you can use in each tweet. And I'm not really much for threads. So, when you have a YouTube channel, you have access to the ability to talk and talk and talk as much as you want until you choose to press stop on the camera. So what I'm going to do is I am going to tell you which movies I watched in the first week of June 2017, and I am going to lightly touch upon each double feature, like hot take reviews, not like my old videos where I go in great detail of how I feel about a movie. I'm just going to just briefly tell you what I remember about what I saw, and if this is something that I enjoy doing, and if I get any positive feedback and you seem to dig this, I might do this again. But who knows? Maybe this is a one-time thing. Maybe this is just an experiment. I have a feeling this might work, though. So here we go. 7 days. The first 7 days. Day one, I did a double feature. My Mom's a Werewolf and Rockula. So when I choose double features, I try to pick a theme, and it's not super important if the two movies that I group together match a lot, but they at least have to match a little bit. And with these two films, I definitely chose two films that are comedies, but that are comedies within the context of horror, the world of horror. So the first film has a werewolf, and the second film has a vampire. So these are monster movies, but comedy monster movies. My Mom's a Werewolf. My biggest takeaway from that film was there was a very unique way that the character that becomes a werewolf, Mom, like in the title, she gets seduced by the character that is a werewolf, and instead of it being like a typical werewolf attack, it's more like a erotic seduction, and he's sucking on her toes, and while he's sucking on her toes, he bites her, and at that moment she comes to her senses, what am I doing? She's realizes she's cheating on her husband. It's not in her character's type to cheat on her husband. It's just that this werewolf it's almost like a vampire. He glamours her, he hypnotizes her with her eyes, so she falls under his spell. But that bite brings her to her senses, and she leaves. But that bite was enough to turn her into a werewolf. And the second film that I watched that night was Rockula. And I've seen Rockula before. Rockula stars Dean Cameron, who a lot of people know and love as Chainsaw from the film Summer School, and I really dig that in that movie his character is obsessed with horror films, and then he himself is actually in a horror film. He's in a film called Bad Dreams, but he's also in Rockula, which is a horror comedy, and that character is a vampire, but he's also a musician, and they show Rockula perform, and of all the performances that you see Rockula do in the movie, the God, I don't want to say funniest because it's not really funny. It's just kind of like, it's almost kind of cringy, is a rap. There's a scene where he, for one song only, he's no longer Rockula, he's Rapula. If you don't want to sit through that entire film to see the Rapula scene, I do believe it's on YouTube. But it's like, it's choice. It's one of those things that's like so... it's so absurd. It's beautiful. The second film that I watched this week, day 2, double feature, Turk 182, starring Timothy Hutton, and From the Hip, starring Judd Nelson. So this may seem like I planned it this way, when in fact it was purely kismet. I didn't realize the time that I had programmed these two films for that night that not only were both films directed by Bob Clark, but these were the two films that Bob Clark made back to back. And that tripped me out. I also got a kick out of seeing actors in both films that I'm used to seeing in other Bob Clark films. Darren McGavin, who is in probably Bob Clark's most famous film, A Christmas Story, he was in both films. And then there's like actors who were in some of his films that were in some of his popular movies from the past. Like Dan Monahan is in From the Hip, and he's also in the Porky's trilogy. Bob Clark is a really fascinating director to me because he never really stuck to one genre. He started off doing horror films. He did Black Christmas, one of the most famous horror films of all time. Then he kind of like segued into like teen sex comedies, so like he did Porky's, and Porky's is one of the most famous teen sex comedies of the 80s. And then he did like A Christmas Story, which is one of the most famous family movies ever. And Turk 182 and From the Hip, I guess, where does that fit in? I guess it's like his stab at young adult, teen, 80s movies, Brat Pack kind of things. They're good. They're not great, but they're good. I enjoy them. On day 3, I watched Drive-In Massacre and Twice Dead. Both low-budget horror films. What can I say? The thing that sticks out with Drive-In Massacre is the weapon. It's a sword. It's like a samurai sword. It's not specifically described as a samurai sword, but you know, it's like a samurai sword. And that's unusual for a horror film. And then, what can I say about Twice Dead? Todd Bridges is in it. He has a small part, and I'm just not used to seeing him in anything, really, outside of Different Strokes, but he's in it. That's cool. The only other Different Strokes person that I associate in the world of horror is Dudley, Gary Coleman's friend in the show. He was in Friday the 13th, Part 5, Reggie the Reckless. Okay, day 4, I watched the double feature Liar's Moon and Fresh Horses. Liar's Moon I watched because Matt Dillon is in it. I really like 80s Matt Dillon films. Here's something of note. Another thing I didn't plan, just purely a coincidence, Susan Tyrrell is in Liar's Moon, and Susan Tyrrell's also in Rockula. Like, Susan Tyrrell's one of those actresses that I really like, that I could go a really long period of time before I see her again in a movie, because she's usually in like really weird offbeat films. And then this week I saw her in 2 films, so that's kind of cool. And then the second film is Fresh Horses, which is a movie that I've been dying to see for a really long time. It's an 80s movie with Andrew McCarthy and Molly Ringwald, and it's not too different from Pretty in Pink. That whole dynamic of he plays a rich guy and she plays like a poor girl, and they have romance, and he's kind of ashamed of her, but I don't know. I feel like it'd be great if they made one more movie together, so it'd be like the Andrew McCarthy, Molly Ringwald, rich guy, poor girl, I'm ashamed of you, secret romance trilogy. Ben Stiller is also in Fresh Horses, and there's a scene in this movie where he's like making drinks, and I swear he's doing a parody of Tom Cruise and Cocktail, which isn't surprising because I'm aware that Ben Stiller has done parodies of Tom Cruise before, and including a parody of Cocktail. But what's weird is the timing. Like, Cocktail came out in July of 1988, And this movie came out in November. So is it a coincidence, or did they really like squeeze in that joke? The fifth movie I watched, excuse me, the fifth day I watched the double feature of Summer of Fear and Don't Go to Sleep. These are both made-for-TV horror films. Summer of Fear I've been dying to see for a long time because it's directed by Wes Craven, and it's one of the few Wes Craven films I've not seen. And it stars Linda Blair and Linda Blair's perm. I don't understand. There's this window of time in the late 70s, early 80s where Linda Blair's hair is always like really permed out, and it's kind of out of control. It's good. I liked it. The movie and her perm, I guess. I don't know. Don't Go to Sleep is another TV movie, and it's funny because I could picture people going, "Why would I want to watch a TV movie that's supposed to be horror if it's not rated R, or if it's not a theatrical film? It's not going to be scary." And that's where you would be wrong, because something that most horror films would never do that this one does is kill children. That's right. Kids die in this movie. How refreshing. On day 6 I watched a double feature of Howl and Parasite. And remember Snakes on a Plane? Howl is werewolves on a train. But it's not campy. It's actually like a cool horror film, not played for laughs. Pretty cool. I liked it. And Parasite is a film from 1982, and it's like a slow-budget sci-fi horror film. The only thing of interest in there is that Demi Moore is in it, and I think it's her first film. She looks really young in it. I'm pretty sure it's her first movie. And then yesterday, or today, actually while I'm filming this, it's, I guess technically still the 7th day, even though it's past midnight, so it's really the next day. The Living Daylights is a James Bond film. On the 7th day of every month, I like to call it Bond Day on Twitter. Happy Bond Day! And I usually celebrate Bond Day by watching a James Bond film. And on Bond Day, I never watch a second film. I always reserve that day just for James Bond. The Living Daylights is the first of 2 James Bond films starring Timothy Dalton as James Bond. This is when Timothy Dalton took over for Roger Moore. His last Bond film before this one was A View to a Kill. And I like The Living Daylights. I don't love The Living Daylights the same way as I feel about Timothy Dalton as James Bond. I like him as Bond. I don't love him as Bond. But there's something about Timothy Dalton as Bond that somehow doesn't feel like James Bond. It almost feels like James Bond's cousin. Like it doesn't feel like 007. It feels like 006. Like he's almost Bond, which is fine. I'll end by saying this. This is purely by chance. I was watching the closing credits of Living Daylights, and something that really stuck out was one of the credits was for camera operator. The guy's name was Chunky Hughes. So if your real name is Chunky Hughes and you're working on a movie and it's time to get your credit, people might try and talk you out of it, and they're like, "You sure you want to go by your real name? Do you want to just go by Roger Hughes or James Hughes?" Or he's like, "No, Chunky's fine." But then what about if it's not his, what if his name is something normal, like Roger Hughes or Timothy Hughes or something, and he chose to go by Chunky? He's like, "Okay, so we're gonna write in Roger Hughes." He's like, "Nope, change it to Chunky." Alright, folks, there you have it. Me talking about the movies that I watched last week. That was kind of fun. I feel like I could do this again next week. We'll see. Send me some feedback. Thanks for watching. If you haven't already, subscribe to my channel here on YouTube, and follow me on Twitter at IsaacsHauntedBee. Until next time, bye-bye.